Hey, Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be my reaction video to our first win of the season. That's right, Carson and the JV squad got the first W of the year. And I'm not sure if you could tell it in the prediction video I did, but I really wanted to pick the Birds to win this just because I thought of that they were desperate for a win, and you're going up against a team that does have a lot of injury issues. That there was, I thought, a good chance we could win that game. I did sort of hint at the fact that I thought we would win one of the next three games, even though I had picked in the preseason prediction video that we would lose all three. I just thought that was going to happen, and ultimately, I'm kicking myself for not picking it. But ultimately, maybe that worked out for the best. Maybe I would have jinxed them if I would have picked them. I'll gladly take a loss in my column, as I'm now 0-4 for my predictions on the season. I'll gladly take that if it means the Eagles come away with their first win of the season. But let's go ahead and take a look at some studs and duds for the game. And since we won, I get to start with the duds this week, which is a nice change of pace, as we get to think about the downside first before we look at the good things that we can celebrate. So the duds of the week, I'm going to have two dishonorable mentions. One of them is Adrian Killens, who just the one play he did actually touch the ball on lost yardage. It was terrible, and just wondered what he was doing out there. Ultimately, I'm not going to make him an actual dud for two reasons. Number one, I don't know that the coaching staff really knew how to use him, and number two, they went ahead and then released him today. So I'm not gonna kick a guy while he's down. My other dishonorable mention is going to be sort of a standing person that I like to put on the duds list, but he didn't play. So J.J. Arcega-Whiteside gets a dishonorable mention only because still, as we go in, now we're through 4 weeks of the season, J.J. and I both have the same amount of receptions on the season. But let's go ahead and take a look at our actual duds of the week. Number 3 is going to be Howie Roseman. And that's only because when your practice squad guys are making more plays than your regular roster and your regular drafted players, I should say, that's an indictment on the draft process, and that's an indictment on your general manager. So Howie Roseman's got to take some blame. Sure, I guess he gets a little bit of credit for finding a guy like Travis Fulgham. But ultimately, I've got to put Howie Roseman on this list. Because the draft picks that we've had have just been miserable, and that could be its own video. My number 2 dud of the week is going to be Duke Riley. Our linebackers stink, and he's just part of that problem. So he's going to end up as number 2. And number 1, permanent place on this list as well, Nate Gary. In fact, I'm thinking of naming these the Garys of the week rather than the duds of the week. For number 1 and number 2 are going to be two of the linebackers who were terrible. They couldn't cover Kittles, and it made me wonder why we were trying to cover him with a linebacker to begin with. It seemed like he was their only weapon, and sort of like the 49ers did with us, they knew Ertz was our best weapon, so they had him double covered all night. I don't know why we couldn't take that cue and do the same thing with Kittles, but for whatever reason, we decided it was okay to let him run all over us for the night. The linebackers, though, just brutal effort, and they're going to be number 1 and number 2 for the duds of the week. But let's go ahead and look at our studs of the week. For my number 5 stud is actually going to be the linebacker that did actually make a big play, and that's Alex Singleton. Granted, the ball was thrown right at him, but when that happens, you've got to make the play, and he rose to the occasion, made the play, and ultimately gets a start, ends up putting that game into a situation where we could really coast more. I know ultimately they came back and sort of made it interesting at the end, but that was a lot of yardage against prevent defense, which they got a score that they probably shouldn't have. But ultimately, we make the stop when we need to at the end. But Alex Singleton's touchdown obviously really puts that game in desperation mode for the 49ers. My number 4 stud of the week is going to be Travis Fulgham. Do I need to explain why? Granted, he only has 2 catches on the day, but he makes the big play when it really counts and scores the go-ahead touchdown in the 4th quarter. So in my book, when you're a guy that I didn't even know before the game started, and you make a big play like that, I think that puts you on the studs of the week list for sure. So Travis Fulgham is going to be my number 4 stud of the week. My number 3 stud of the week is actually going to be Carson Wentz. I think Carson started out a little shaky, but I think he finally got into a groove. He has the touchdown run then, and I think that really sort of settled him down a little bit. I still think he's missing some throws here and there, which is why he's not a little higher on this list. But ultimately, when it really mattered, he made the plays they needed to make to really get the team where it needed to be to win the game, and makes a beautiful throw to Travis for the go-ahead touchdown. So ultimately, Wentz, he only had 1 turnover in this game, which is an improvement, and he scores 2 touchdowns, one with his feet and one through the air. So Wentz is going to be my number 3 stud of the week. My number 2 stud of the week is going to be the entire defensive line. The defensive line was the reason we won this game. They were huge all game, getting constant pressure. The pressure leads to the first interception. So, that certainly was in a critical point where they're down in the red zone, and it causes the bad throw and the interception for the first turnover by the defense. The defensive line also gets 4 sacks, and the 5th sack that was gotten by Cre'Von LeBlanc, which leads to the fumble, that was aided by the defensive line collapsing the pocket and allowing LeBlanc easy access to the quarterback. So I think ultimately the defensive line really was responsible for all 3 of the turnovers that we got in this game, which really raises the question of, how can we win games in the future? It's going to be with that defensive line. The defensive line has been playing well now the last couple of weeks, and I think they're finally getting things going. And if that is the case, I think it'd make our whole defense look a little better. And if our defense can keep us in some games, I think the offense will be able to do just enough, hopefully, to maybe get us some wins, beyond just the few that we think that maybe still are on the schedule. So the defensive line, everyone that played on the defensive line last night is on my studs of the week for number 2. My number 1 stud of the week, though, we criticize him when they lose, and he makes poor decisions. So we've got to praise him when they win, and he makes good decisions. And that, of course, is our head coach, Doug Peterson. Number 1, right off the bat, we score the first touchdown, and he decides to go for 2, which was huge for 2 reasons. Number 1, I think it sent a message that he wanted to put last week behind him. He was criticized for being too timid against the Bengals, especially at the end of regulation and the end of overtime, and settling for a tie. So I think he wanted to show that he was going to be aggressive again, and I think it sent a message to his team that he was going to do what they had to try and win the game. And also, it was huge in the outcome ultimately for just how the points ended up going down in this game. If you really think about it, San Francisco then scores the touchdown. They decide to just elect to go for 1, which is the traditional play. But then as the game plays out, when we go up 18-14, that means they need a touchdown to retake the lead. Of course, we get the pick 6, and then we go up 25-14. So now we're up 11. So when they score the touchdown again, they have to go for 2 there to try and make it a 3-point game. And when you think about it, if we had played the traditional way, the score would have been 24-20 with them having a decision, and they clearly would have kicked the extra point then. And then at the end of the game, you're talking about them possibly trying to kick a game-tying field goal to force overtime instead of the Hail Mary that they threw from the 30-odd yard line. They might have tried a long field goal to try and tie that game up at that point, rather than needing to have a touchdown because their 2-point conversion failed. So really that 2-point conversion happens early in the game, but it ends up dictating how the scoring goes down the 4th quarter because there isn't much scoring that happens between those first early touchdowns and the rest of the game. There's just not that much that happens in between there. And then there's a flurry of scoring right at the end, but the differences were made up by that difference in going for 2 versus 1, and they have a brilliant play call that gets Ertz an easy 2-point conversion. So ultimately, Doug Peterson, I think, doing that was huge. And then the other thing I really liked that he did in this game was at one point I thought he was getting a little away from it and it was causing problems, but then he went back to it. And that was he got number 11 rolling out into the pocket. And really, I think that's, if we're going to have success this year, that's going to be how it's going to happen, especially with our offensive line as beat up as it is. We are going to have him rolling out and getting, so we're not keeping that pocket where the defensive lineman can just go straight back for the quarterback. That's got to be the way they're going to do it with designed rollouts. And ultimately, I think if they do that, Wentz is certainly capable of making plays outside the pocket with his feet and through the air. Ultimately, for that reason, I think it was a brilliant adjustment that Doug made in this game, and I think that's something we need to do going forward. So Doug Peterson, the only thing I would really criticize him on was I still don't understand why he doesn't have Miles Sanders out for our last possession to try and get some better yardage. The running game wasn't doing much all game. But Sanders was having a little more success than the other guys. So I think Sanders at least deserved one touch there. But other than that, that's the only real criticism I would have for Doug in this game. And ultimately, he gets us the win. And check it out. We're in first place. It's hard to believe, but yes, we are in first place. And ultimately, that is something that I didn't think was going to be the case a couple days ago. But since everyone else lost again, and once again, for the second week in a row, we did not lose. We are now a half game up in first place and ahead of this terrible division that 7 wins might be generous, saying that the division winner could end up. I wouldn't even be surprised if this division winner had less than that, which is really sort of scary. But that's how bad this division looks right now. So at any rate, for now, though, we're in first place. The next 2 weeks still look sort of rough, but ultimately, if we can get through that and maybe somehow figure out a way to split those 2 games, then we've got 3 division games, which we know should be winnable because this division's lousy. And at that point, anything can happen. But let me know what you think. Are there any studs or duds that I'm missing in my list? Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Obviously, I'll check in before the game against the Pittsburgh Steelers and give you my prediction. Until then, fly Eagles fly.